Donald Trump really wants to end the war, he can follow through on this threat of secondary sanctions. And what I mean by secondary sanctions are punishments for people who buy Russian oil. And if he were to do that, if he were to say to China or India or Turkey or anybody else who buys Russian oil, if you do so, then you're going to be sanctioned by the United States. Then guess what? They won't buy Russian oil.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today we've had Sir Bill Browder on the show. We've spoken about the irony of Vladimir Putin holding this military parade to mark the end of the Second World War and the defeat over Nazi Germany when he's orchestrating such atrocities to Ukrainians. We've also spoken to about the friendships that Vladimir Putin has on the world stage and how this relationship is going with Donald Trump and whether Donald Trump is about to change strategies and really back Ukraine. All that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube. So Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Great to be here.
It's a big day in Russia. We've, of course, got the military parade taking place in Moscow. But before that occurs today, Bill, we've seen this alliance between Russia and China taking place. We've seen the two nations come out with a statement saying that they've forged a friendship of steel as Xi Jinping is hosted by Vladimir Putin this week. He said in a joint statement that this week will strengthen coordination in order to decisively counter Washington's course of dual containment of Russia and China. What's your reaction to a statement like that between the two nations?
Well, both countries are adversaries to the United States, adversaries to the European Union, and adversaries to the free world. I think that Xi Jinping is in Russia just to celebrate the cheap oil that he's getting from Russia since the war started. He's been a big beneficiary of Russian oil, and that's what he's there for. There's no such thing as friendship in these types of international relations, and particularly between Russia and China, which are effectively natural enemies. On one side of the border, you have a huge number of people and no natural resources, which is China. And then the other side of the border, you have hardly any people and abundant natural resources. And so at some point, that becomes a bone of contention. At some point, that becomes a potential flashpoint. And if you look back over history, they've never been friends, these two countries. And so for them to sort of announce their friendship now it's definitely a friends with benefits situation, and those benefits are cheap oil for China.
Bill, you're right. We haven't seen these two be friends, but is it a friendship bloomed out of a joint desire to push back against the United States, to push back against the West? And in that, on a separate question, does it look like Donald Trump has the upper hand in this fight to end the war now?
Well, let me answer the second part first. The war is not ending. It hasn't ended. Trump promised it would end in 24 hours. He was definitive in his campaign speeches over and over and over that this war will end in 24 hours when I'm president. Well, it didn't end in 24 hours. He then said, well, he was actually just exaggerating. Then the plan was to end the war in 100 days. That hasn't happened. There has not even been an agreement to a temporary ceasefire so they can negotiate. And so I think that Trump is just exaggerating and making it up as he went along. This war is not ending anytime soon at all.
Bill, Putin said that he and Xi, they will personally oversee all elements in their relationship, including a boost of trade and investment by 2030. Of course, you mentioned we're not quite sure what this boost of trade and investment would mean, but China is already Russia's biggest trading partner. I wonder, do you see Xi Jinping handing Russia an economic lifeline for them to continue their war with Ukraine? Because, of course, we know money is Russia's biggest downfall. We know that they have a dwindling economy. We know that they need to fund this war and are struggling to do so. So do you see Xi Jinping handing him this economic lifeline?
Well, I think there's two ways to look at it. I don't think that China is going to bail Russia out if they don't have any money. I don't think China is going to be giving money to Russia in order to carry on the war. I think China would be very happy to sell goods to Russia and to give money to Russia for oil, as long as that oil is discounted. But there's no there's no this is not an alliance of anything other than convenience. And at the moment, of course, Russia gets money from China. They get money from India. They get money from Turkey. They get money from all sorts of places for their oil. And in fact, the oil is one of the main issues going forward as to how to end this war. If Donald Trump really wants to end the war, he can follow through on this threat of secondary sanctions. And what I mean by secondary sanctions are punishments for people who buy Russian oil. And if he were to do that, if he were to say to China or India or Turkey or anybody else who buys Russian oil, if you do so, then you're going to be sanctioned by the United States, then guess what? They won't buy Russian oil. And if they don't buy Russian oil, then the Russians get less money. And if they have less money, then they have the smaller ability to execute this war. And so that has to be one of the strategies if Trump is serious about ending the war.
So we've seen that Donald Trump has failed to broker any sort of peace deal with Russia. You never thought that this would even happen from the start, Bill. You've made that quite clear. We've seen Trump, I guess, starting to condemn Putin in the last few weeks as he starts to realise that perhaps he's being strung along. But do you think that this failure to broker a deal with Russia has led to Russia and Putin falling into each other's arms, especially as we see China and the United States enter this trade war, enter this war of tariffs, that they're kind of coming together with this alliance over hating the United States?
Well, I think they've always hated the United States. Russia his main enemy has been the United States since the time of communism. China, as it's growing and becoming more economically prosperous, also hates the United States. Both countries are dictatorships. Both countries don't like liberal democracies. They don't like freedom. They don't like any of the things that we hold dear because they're in a sort of a command and control state, and that's what they do. And so, to the extent that their interests are aligned, which they are right now, they will be allies. There may be moments in the future where their interests aren't aligned, but for the moment, you have Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, all voting together at the United Nations, all coordinating, all three countries, the Russia or China, North Korea, and Iran, providing different types of aid to Russia for this war. And so that's what you get. You have literally the good guys versus the bad guys. They're the axis of evil.
They are, Bill, but how embarrassing do you think the United States should feel, or Donald Trump and his administration should feel, for voting alongside those countries, those axes of evil, at the UN General Assembly a couple of months ago?
Well, I think that it was truly a shameful moment. I won't forget it, and nor will many other people. It was something that let's see how they vote in the next set of votes at the United Nations. But it's for a person like myself who has spent literally 2 decades fighting evil in Russia, and having the United States be my primary ally for almost all that time, and to watch them voted that way was heartbreaking. And so I hope that it was just an embarrassing blip, but I wouldn't be so sure. I mean, it's impossible to predict how the Trump administration is going to follow their policy towards Russia going forward. And I wouldn't, get out all the champagne and start celebrating that all of a sudden that something has suddenly changed. If you remember, shortly after Trump was inaugurated, he made some very tough statements about Putin and Russia. He said, taxes, tariffs, and sanctions if he doesn't come to the table. And then all of a sudden, Trump is voting with Russia and China at the UN. Trump is shouting at Zelensky at the White House and the Oval Office, and for a brief period of time, military aid was cut off. And so I wouldn't start declaring any kind of victory right now. The tide has turned. The mood has changed. It's thankfully changed. It's definitely a relief for Ukraine and a relief for me as I follow this. But one small move doesn't change the what's happened before, and doesn't make me confident that everything is going to be good going forward.
Yeah, but I do wonder if this relationship between China and Russia, Bill, because we know that the United States considers China to be its biggest rival, its biggest competition in the world. So I wonder if we see these two joining forces coming together to declare their friendship, will push Donald Trump into changing strategies. Perhaps it will push him into realising that the only way he can end this war, and for it to fall on his legacy that he ended the war, is by funneling more money into military aid for Ukraine, is by siding with NATO allies, by coming together to give all Ukraine needs so that they can win the war on their own terms.
Well, that's perfect logic, and by the way, whether Russia and China were falling into each other's arms or not, that should have been the position from the very beginning. That has been the position. That was the position when the war started. That's been the position of the United States through successive presidencies, Democrats and Republicans, and so that should be the position right now. And if that is the position, thank God it's the position. It hasn't been the position for the last few months. Let's see if it really is.
Bill, when we look at when we look at Russia, when we look at Vladimir Putin, we think of him as such an isolated figure. But the reality is he's hosting this military parade today to mark the end of World War II, to mark the Soviet Union, along with other allies, win over Nazi Germany at the end of the war in 1945. But he's actually hosting not only Xi Jinping, he's hosting world leaders from Brazil, from Slovakia, from Serbia, Cuba, Bosnia, Armenia, Venezuela, Egypt, plus many more. Does Russia have more friends than we realise?
Well, this has always been the case. If you looked at how it was going when the war started, you had what I would call the G7, plus the European Union, plus Australia, New Zealand, Japan. And then you had on one side, on the Ukrainian side, and then you had what's been sort of categorized as the global South, which is more or less everybody else on the other side. And all these global Southerners were basically perfectly happy to ignore the atrocities in Ukraine and sort of maintain friendship with Russia. And if you follow the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Twitter, you'll see every few days there'll be some African leader, meeting at the Kremlin, getting his day with the Putin. And so Putin is doing a lot to try to keep on side whoever is willing to effectively take their money.
One of the allies that I think is an interesting point to bring up, Bill, and you mentioned this reliance on Russian oil, because Russia and Venezuela, they've signed this Strategic Partnership Act on Wednesday ahead of this military parade. They will also be present for this parade today. These countries have already been allies through military and trading already, but Donald Trump imposing these 25% tariffs on any country that's importing Venezuelan oil kind of may have shifted gears. And I wonder if this condemnation of Venezuela and their criminal activity from Donald Trump, coupled with the fact that they've imposed this 25% tariff on anyone importing oil from Venezuela, has Donald Trump effectively pushed them into the arms of Russia?
Well, I don't think he's pushing anyone into anyone's arms. I mean, the Venezuelans and the Russians have been strong allies for a very long time. The Venezuelans have effectively been propped up by Russia, and you've had numerous trips of senior Russian officials going to Venezuela for years and years and years. And so I don't think that anyone's pushing anyone anywhere. Of course, I think there's been a lot of stuff. Canada, for example, is being pushed into the arms of the European Union. I think you can say that pretty definitively. But when it comes to these ostracized regimes, they've been ostracized for a long time and continue to be ostracized, and now hang out together, vote together at the United Nations, go to each other's military parades. But I don't think that that's new with Trump. I think that that's just the nature of the world. It is new with Trump to have Canada, basically talking about joining the European Union and other things like that. But as far as these outliers, I don't think that they're behaving any differently than they were before.
Just finally, Bill, I know I can't keep you long, but I want to read out a quote from the leader of the Freedom of Russian Legion. They've spoken about this decision to hold this military parade from Putin's side. They said the atrocities by Russian servicemen in Ukraine resemble the actions of Nazi Germany, and Putin's propaganda and symbols are reminiscent of those of the Third Reich. Now we see we see Putin also slam Vladimir Zelensky for being neo-Nazi. So how ironic and contradictory do you find Vladimir Putin holding this celebration of ending the war, of the end of Nazi Germany, when in reality he's resembling it?
Well, it's exactly right. It's he has set up a fascist regime. He has set up a totalitarian state. He is using propaganda to crush and effectuate genocide against the Ukrainian people. And so it's the number of deaths has come nowhere near close to what the Nazis did with the Jews and in the Second World War. But Putin has all the trademarks of a fascist dictator, and so for him to be labeling anybody a Nazi is really quite rich.
So Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you.